G'day, this is Chris Savage from RL Ministries in Australia, welcoming you to this session of the book of Jeremiah. I pray that it will be of benefit to you and help you in your Christian growth. Thank you for coming along. So we're into session 32. We're looking at chapter 49, verses 7 to 39. Now, in the last session, we saw the cities of Moab and Ammon. Moab was one of the reason for her harsh punishment was her anti-Semitism. She derided the Jewish people, a result that she herself will be derided. Remember Genesis 12:3, curse for curse in kind. Moab's going to be destroyed from being a people because of her pride plus her anti-Semitism. Now, Moab is a part of Jordan today. However, in the future, there's going to be a restoration because there's going to be a saved nation of Moab in the kingdom. And the next nation we looked at was Ammon. Now, Ammon is also going to be punished because Ammon, she took possession of Jewish territory when all the invasions took place. Ammon stepped in and took over some Jewish territory. So they're also going to be dispersed so that not one person will be able to gather them throughout the world. Now, Rabbah was the capital of the Ammonites, and that's modern day Amman, and that is still under judgment today. She's going to become a desolate heap. However, there's going to be a restoration for Ammon as well, because there's going to be a saved nation called Ammon in the Messianic kingdom. Now, the next nations we look at is the nation of Edom. Now, the kingdom of Edom, who is she? Well, Edom was located in the Transjordan between Moab to the northeast, and then we had the Arabah to the west and the Arabian Desert to the south and the east. Now, most of its former territory is now divided between present-day Israel and southern Jordan. This is the nation of Ammon. Now, God gave the region southeast of the Dead Sea to Esau, right? Remember Esau? And this may be the reason why it was called Edom, for the Hebrew term means red. Hebrew term for Edom means red, and Esau had red hair. So another reason for this name could be that the nation was famous for its red cliffs also. Now, on their trip out of Egypt, Moses and the Israelites requested permission to pass through the land of Edom. But if you remember, the Edomite ruler refused to grant them access. That's in Numbers 20. And then from this point on, Edom was identified in the scriptures as Israel's adversary, and the two countries were constantly engaged in battles. Now, after Judah was conquered by the Babylonians, the Edomites still posed a danger to the Jewish people and even conducted raids into Judah. And as a result of this, the Lord inflicted vengeance on Edom, which we're going to see very shortly. Now, God decreed that Edom would be a wasteland with only wild animals living there, and you can check that out in Malachi chapter 1, verses 2 to 5. Malachi 1, 2 to 5. So now we're going to look at the certainty of judgment from verses 7 to 13. Now, Edom is also mentioned by other prophets. Isaiah 21, 11 to 12 mentions her. It deals with the future of the Edomites. Then we have Isaiah 34, 1 to 17. Isaiah 63, 1 to 6. It's Isaiah 34, 1 to 17. Isaiah 63, 1 to 6. Ezekiel also mentions her. Ezekiel 25, verses 1 to 14, along with Ezekiel 35, 1 to 15. And then we had Amos 1, 11 to 12. It talks about Edom. And Obadiah prophesied against Edom. That's Obadiah verses 1 to 21. Now, we're going to look at the certainty of judgment here. Edom, as we said before, is in present-day southern Jordan. Now, in these verses, he deals with the certainty of Edom's judgment. In the first part of verse 7, he introduces his new topic of Edom. So, in verse 7b, he deals with the loss of Edomite wisdom. God asks, "Thus says Jehovah of hosts, is wisdom no more in Teman?" Teman. Who's Teman? Well, Teman was the grandson of Esau. He's a grandson of Esau, and we find it in Genesis 36. 11 and 15. Now Teman, the grandson, he established a city. And I said earlier, remember the Edomites, descendants of Esau, the twin brother of Jacob. And now the question is asked, is counsel perished from the prudent? Is their wisdom vanished? This is speaking about Edom. So there must have been a time, sometime in the past, biblical past, when this kingdom was known for its wisdom. But at the time of the prophecy here by Jeremiah, all counsel and wisdom had now vanished. And in verse 8, he spells out the calamity of Edom. Flee ye, turn back, dwell in the depths, O inhabitants of Dedan, for I'll bring the calamity of Esau upon him, the time that I shall visit him. Now, Dedan, who's Dedan? Well, Dedan was the grandson of Abraham through his third wife, Keturah, right? Grandson of Abraham, Dedan. Yeah, Genesis 25, verses 1 to 3, he's mentioned there. Now, the reason for the inhabitants of Dedan to flee is because God will bring the calamity of Esau, Edom, upon him also. It is a time that God will visit him with judgment. So the descendants of Abraham's third wife, Keturah, through whom he had 6 other sons after Sarah's death, settled into Arabia along the borders of Edom, right? So she's along the borders, Dedan's along the borders of Edom, and the judgment that's going to strike Edom is going to spill over into the Arab tribes beyond Edom's borders. We're going to see this a little bit later on. So that's where Dedan comes into this, where they're told to flee because the calamity on Edom is going to spill over into the neighboring countries as well. In verses 9 to 10 describes the totality of Edom's destruction. And the description begins in verse 9 with a figure of speech. If grape gatherers came to you, would they not leave some gleaning grapes? If thieves by night, would they not destroy till they had enough? Now, verse 9 here is a quotation of Obadiah 5, right? Obadiah 5. Remember, I said before, Obadiah was a prophecy against Edom. Now, Obadiah 5 says, if thieves came to you, if robbers in the night, oh, what a disaster awaits you. This is Obadiah. Would they not steal only as much as they wanted? If grape pickers came to you, would they not leave a few grapes? So the figure of speech here has a very simple message for Edom. When grapes are picked, some clusters are usually left hanging. And when thieves break into a home, they don't take everything away. Thieves take only that which is valuable and which they can easily carry away. They don't take everything in the house. There's always something left on the vine. There's always something left in the home. However, verse 10 says that although grape gatherers leave gleanings and thieves leave some possessions, it's not going to be like that for the Edomites. But I have made Esau bare. I have uncovered his secret places, and he shall not be able to hide himself. His seed is destroyed, and his brethren and his neighbors, and he is not. So the picture here for Edom is one of total destruction. There'll be no grapes left upon the vine. There'll be no possessions left in the home. The point in verse 10 is that in the case of the Edomites, the destruction is going to be total. Yeah, we already noticed that God promised the Moabites and the Ammonites that a remnant would survive. God makes no such promises to the Edomites. With the Edomites, the picture here is one of a totality of judgment. And this agrees with the other prophets. Ezekiel 25, 12 to 14, and Ezekiel 35, 1 to 15 also make the same point. Ezekiel makes the point that while during the millennium kingdom the entire world is beautified, while the whole world is blossoming as the rose, the land of Edom will be a continual, perpetual, burning wasteland. It will have no inhabitants whatsoever. Obadiah 17 to 21 points out that Esau will not have a single descendant left. Now, while Jacob will have many descendants, Esau, his brother, will have no descendants. Esau will not have a single descendant left. And the fulfillment of these verses can only take place in the context of the Great Tribulation. In the course of the Great Tribulation, there's going to be a total devastation into southern Jordan or Edom, in which no Edomites will survive. Verse 11, in the context of judgment, there is now mercy. God offers mercy to the Edomites. Leave your fatherless children. I will preserve them alive, and let your widows trust in me. The point of this verse here is that after the initial judgment, when the fathers die by divine judgment, there will only be children and widows left. And the children and widows are offered life if they trust in the God of Israel rather than the God of the Edomites. However, as the subsequent verses show, the offer was rejected. For the Edomite survivors continued to trust in themselves and their own gods, and this caused the destruction to subsequently become total, so that no descendants of the Edomites will survive. Then in verse 12, we have a picture of the cup of wrath. When the cup, remember, when the cup is used symbolically, it is a picture of the wrath of God. For thus says Jehovah, this is verse 12, chapter 49. For thus says Jehovah, behold, they to whom it pertained not to drink of the cup shall assuredly drink. And are you he that shall altogether go unpunished? You shall not go unpunished, but you shall surely drink. Yeah, the cup of the wrath of God, though Edom does not wish to drink it, they shall surely drink it. God's wrath is going to be poured out upon Edom to a great extent in the tribulation, so that none will survive from Edom. They will drink the wrath of God. And then in verse 12, if brother Jacob, that's the Jews, meaning the Jews, the chosen ones, are forced to drink, surely brother Esau and his descendants will also drink from the wrath of God. So whereas for the Jews, the promise is that a remnant will return, but as for Edom, for Esau, there is no such promise. And then in the first part of verse 13, for I have sworn by myself, says Jehovah, that Bozrah shall become an astonishment, a reproach, a waste, and a curse. So he focuses here upon one city of the Edomites called Bozrah, and the effects that this cup of wrath will have upon it. Now, Bozrah is the same city that is commonly known today as Petra. And as a result of the wrath of God to be poured out upon the Edomites in the Great Tribulation, Bozrah in particular will suffer the divine wrath. Bozrah will become four things in the Great Tribulation. First of all, an astonishment. Second, a reproach. Third, a waste. Fourth, a curse. So Bozrah will become the key focal point or the center of Edom's destruction. And the destruction will begin at Bozrah and spread throughout the land of Edom. Now, why is the destruction going to begin at Bozrah? Why? Because in Micah chapter 2, verses 12 to 13, remember, Bozrah is the place where the Jews are going to be in hiding during the tribulation period. According to Isaiah 34, verses 1 to 7, and Isaiah 62, verses 1 to 6, Bozrah is the exact place of the second coming of Jesus Christ. And because of its unique role during the tribulation and with the course of the campaign of Armageddon, Bozrah will become the real center of divine judgment, and especially the destruction of the Edomites. And then the second part of verse 13 describes the results. And all the cities thereof shall be perpetual wastes. The cities of Bozrah will become a perpetual waste. This is especially seen in the Ezekiel passage. The entire land of Edom or southern Jordan will be devastated. So this includes the land from the Zered River, which parallels the southern part of the Dead Sea, all the way to modern-day Aqaba on the Red Sea. So this entire territory will become a perpetual burning wasteland. Now, a bit of a summary of verses 7 to 13 here. The emphasis of this passage is on the certainty and totality of Edom's destruction, so as to leave nothing remaining of the seed of Esau. Edom had been given an opportunity to trust in the Lord, but failed to respond. Therefore, her cup of iniquity was now full, and Edom had to drink from the cup of God's wrath. And the result of that was the land becoming nothing but a waste and a curse. So God offered mercy in this time of judgment, but Edom refused to accept it. Now we come to the destruction of Edom in verses 14 to 19. And he gives the details here concerning this. In verse 14 is the means for Edom and Bozrah's destruction. I have heard tidings from Jehovah, and an ambassador is sent among the nations. And so what we see here is that an ambassador is sent to the nations with a message saying, gather yourselves together and come against her. Rise up for battle. So the gathering of the nations elsewhere in Scripture is part of the campaign of Armageddon. And the same gathering is mentioned in places like Revelation chapter 16, verses 12 to 16, Psalms 2, and Joel chapter 3, verses 9 to 11. Now, the gathering of these armies, which is the armies of the world under the leadership of the Antichrist, is for the purpose of annihilating the Jews. They will gather at Armageddon, or better, the valley of Jezreel, and then move south against the Jews of Jerusalem. And eventually, Jerusalem will fall according to Zechariah 12, verses 1 to 3, and Zechariah 14, verses 1 to 2. Zechariah 12, 1 to 3, Zechariah 14, 1 to 2. However, as we notice from Micah chapter 2, verses 12 to 13, the majority of the Jews will no longer be in Israel, but will be in Bozrah. And these armies will continue southward against the Jews to Bozrah or Petra. Verse 14 then is dealing with one of the stages of the campaign of Armageddon. The armies of the Antichrist have gathered against the Jews and now begin coming against the Jews which have fled to Bozrah or Petra. And this verse here is actually a quotation of Obadiah 1, Obadiah verse 1. The result of this gathering of the nations in verse 14 is the reduction of the nation of Edom in verse 15. The result is that Edom is reduced. For behold, I have made you small among the nations and despised among men. So verse 15 of Jeremiah 49 is actually a quotation of Obadiah 2. Then verse 16, the reason for Edom's divine judgment is because of Edom's pride. As for your terribleness, the pride of your heart has deceived you, O you that dwell in the clefts of the rock, that holds the height of the hill. Though you should make your nest as high as the eagle, I will bring you down from thence, says Jehovah. So the picture here is that Edom has had a lot of pride in her defenses and in her ability to ward off any possible attack. Nevertheless, none of her high defenses will be of any avail. All of this will be destroyed as the armies move southward. And verse 16 is actually a quotation of Obadiah verses 3 to 4. And then in verse 17, Edom shall become an astonishment. Everyone that passed by it shall be astonished and shall hiss at all the plagues thereof. So the results in Edom are that Edom is going to become this astonishment. Everyone who passes by Edom will be astonished at it. They'll hiss at its plagues. Now, as already mentioned, Edom will become a perpetual burning wasteland through the millennial kingdom without fail. She'll be a perpetual burning wasteland. It'll be nothing, it will be a thing to hiss at. The people in the southern part of Israel, the people south of the Red Sea, as they look eastward, will look to and see the mountains of the Edomites. They'll see Edom's mountains, a continual burning wasteland. They'll hiss at it and spit at it. It's going to become a place of reproach. Now in verse 18, as in the overthrow of Sodom and Gomorrah and the neighbor cities thereof, says Jehovah, no man shall dwell there, neither shall any son of man sojourn there. The emphasis here is upon totality. He gives a comparison here of total destruction. The comparison is with the overthrow of Sodom and Gomorrah and the major cities thereof. Yeah, when God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, they became a perpetual wasteland, and no one has lived in them since. The same is going to be true of the Edomites. Edom will be so terribly, totally, and completely destroyed that no one will live in it. In fact, no one will even walk through it, through his or her country, to pass by it. So what will be true of Babylon, which we're going to see in the next chapter, Jeremiah 50 verse 40, is also going to be true of Edom. In the kingdom, there's going to be two desolate, burning wastelands. First, Edom or southern Jordan, and second, Babylon, which we're going to see a little bit later on. Now, in verse 19, the emphasis here is upon the suddenness of the destruction. Behold, he shall come up like a lion from the pride of the Jordan against a strong habitation. So the pride of the Jordan was mentioned earlier, right back in Jeremiah 12, verse 5. The enemy of Edom would be like a lion who attacks his prey without warning. However, the verse makes an interesting statement that goes against the general behavior of lions. So the lions attacked Edom, and then all of a sudden, for I will suddenly make them run away from it. So, just as suddenly as the enemy attacked, he would now run away. And the question arises as to what would make him do that? What's going to cause this enemy to so quickly run away? According to what we just said back in verse 14, the armies of the Antichrist will march south from Jerusalem to attack the Jews in Bozrah. This attack will be sudden. However, God himself will cause them to run away just as quickly. Why? Because at this very point in time, the Jewish people will cry out in unison to the Messiah, confessing their sin of having rejected him and asking him to return and to come to their aid. And you can find this in Hosea chapter 15 to Hosea 5:15, not chapter 15, Hosea 5 verse 15 to Hosea 6 verse 3. So as a nation, they will receive salvation. For each one of the people will have to come to a saving faith in Messiah. This is the Jews who are in hiding in Bozrah. Their salvation will then bring about the second coming of Jesus, and he will return not to Jerusalem, but to Bozrah. Bozrah, right? And we looked at some of these passages before. You can check this out in Isaiah 34 verses 1 to 7, Isaiah 34 1 to 7, Isaiah 63 1 to 6, Isaiah 63 1 to 6, Habakkuk chapter 3 verse 3, Habakkuk 3 verse 3, and the Micah passage, Micah 2 verse 12 to 13. Another noteworthy statement here in Jeremiah 49 is made in verse 19, the second part. And whoso is chosen, him will I appoint over it. Now, the verse here doesn't reveal who God chooses, but according to Obadiah 17 and Obadiah 21, they're going to be Jews, and they will own the land of Edom. No one will live there, but as far as title deed is concerned, it's going to belong to the Jews. The passage in Jeremiah 49 that is dealing with Edom's destruction ends in the last part of verse 19 with several questions. For who is like me, and who will appoint me a time, and who is a shepherd that will stand before me? Because of God, of who God is and his power, he can and he will bring all this about. So in dealing with the destruction of Edom, Jeremiah describes a judgment which will have its full force in the millennial kingdom. The destruction of Edom comes to an end in verses 20 to 22, and it is all because of the divine purpose of God. Verse 21, the earth trembles at the noise of their fall. There is a cry, the noise whereof is heard in the Red Sea. Here we have in verse 20 the counsel of God. Therefore, oh, sorry, I just read you the wrong verse, didn't I? Yes, I did. Read you verse 21. Verse 20. Therefore, this is the counsel of God. Therefore, hear ye the counsel of Jehovah, that he has taken against Edom, and his purposes that he has purposed against the inhabitants of Teman. There's a call to the world to understand God's divine decree. God has decreed a special, unique destruction of the land of Edom that will surely be fulfilled. And the counsel is that surely they shall drag them away, even the little ones of the flock. Surely he shall make their habitations desolate over them. The Edomites would be dragged off like lambs to the slaughter, and the pastures of these sheep would become desolate. And the result of God's counsel and decree against Edom are found in verse 21. The earth trembles at the noise of their fall. There is a cry, the noise whereof is heard in the Red Sea. So the entire earth trembles at the noise of their fall. And the reason is that their fall will come with the second coming. And when the second coming occurs, the entire earth will indeed tremble. This second coming will be accompanied by earthquakes. And you can see that in Zechariah 14, verses 4 to 5, along with Joel 3, verses 14 to 17, and Revelation 16, 17 to 21. There's a cry. Its noise is heard at the Red Sea. The Red Sea is due south of Bozrah, along the Arabah and the northern Rift Valley. The mention of the cry being heard all the way down might solve the riddle of Revelation chapter 14. Now, the picture in Revelation 14, verses 17 to 20, Revelation 14, 17 to 20, is that when Jesus is through threshing the nations, when Jesus has finished the campaign of Armageddon, destroying the armies of the Antichrist, blood will reach all the way up to the level of the horse's neck. Now, the distance from Jerusalem to Bozrah is about 100 miles, or about, I don't know, about 160 kilometers. The distance from Jerusalem to the Red Sea is about 200 miles, or roughly about 350 kilometers. The picture here in Jeremiah 49:21 is that the slaughter, which begins at Bozrah, will make itself all the way back north and end at the valley of Jehoshaphat in Jerusalem. And Joel chapter 3, verses 12 to 13 tells us this. The actual slaughter and fighting between Christ and the Antichrist armies will extend from Bozrah right back to Jerusalem, that 100 miles or so. Yet the blood will continue to flow southward to the Red Sea. And indeed, the blood will extend for a distance of that 200 miles or 350 kilometers. In verse 22, the center of the destruction is Bozrah. Behold, he shall come up and fly as the eagle and spread out his wings against Bozrah, and the heart of the mighty men of Edom at that day shall be as the heart of a woman in her pangs. The result here is that the hearts of the mighty men of Edom shall be like the heart of a woman in birth pangs. And with this verse, God's judgment concerning the Edomites comes to an end. Now we're going to look at another area called Damascus or Aram or Syria. This is verse 23 to 27. Damascus is located near Mount Hermon, and Damascus is the capital of 3 Syrian states that included Hamath and Arpad. Now, what's the importance of the history of this place? What's the significance? Well, in biblical times, the cities of Damascus, Hamath, and Arpad belonged to the region of Aram. Now, this Hebrew term designates a territory that covered much of present-day Syria, southwestern Turkey, and parts of Lebanon and Iraq. The Syrians mentioned in our English Bible are Arameans in the Hebrew text. They're from Aram, A-R-A-M, and they lived on a raised plateau. And this topography is reflected in the Hebrew term Aram, which is derived from a root meaning height or high region or highland. Now, this is just a little bit of background to Damascus here. As for the three Aramaean cities, Damascus was and still is the capital of Syria. And by extension, the term Damascus can also refer to the larger geographic region of the Aramean kingdom. But the city itself is situated on the edge of the Syrian Arab desert. On all but the east side, surrounded by mountains, and is fed by two rivers, the Barada River and the Pharpar River. Now, first time Damascus is mentioned in the Bible, it's in connection with Abraham's rescue of Lot from a coalition of Mesopotamian kings, right back in Genesis 14:15. Damascus was frequently linked to conflicts with Israel. King David conquered the Aramean kingdom and subdued Damascus back in 2 Samuel 8, 5-6. 2 Samuel 8, 5-6. But during Solomon's reign, King Rezin of Damascus regained control of Aram in 1 Kings 11, 23-25. 1 Kings 11, 23-25. When Israel separated into two kingdoms after the death of Solomon, the power of Damascus grew, and over time, Israel and Judah entered into separate alliances with the kings of Damascus. Now, the reason for all that, what I'm telling you is that this shows that Damascus plays an important role in all of the scriptures with the history of Damascus here. It's perhaps best known in the New Testament as a place where the Apostle Paul had his dramatic encounter with the risen Messiah in Acts 9 on the road to Damascus. Now, unlike the prophecies regarding Egypt, the Philistines, Moab, Ammon, and Edom, the prophecies against Damascus, we don't have any specific reason for the destruction that was decreed upon the city. We just simply, it doesn't tell us. Now, in verses 23-27, by the way, Damascus is also mentioned in other prophetic passages. You can find Damascus in Isaiah chapter 17, verses 1-14, Isaiah 17, 1-14, and also in Amos chapter 1, verses 3-5. Now, first part of verse 23, he introduces this topic of Damascus. Hamath is confounded, and Arpad. Now, as a capital, remember, Damascus was the head of Aram, while Hamath and Arpad were two other key cities in this territory. The second part of verse 23, he deals with the effects upon the Syrian city-states. He mentions that they'll be confounded. Why? Because they have heard evil tidings. The results are that they are melted away. There is sorrow or anxiety on the sea. It cannot be quiet. So basically, they would shake with anxiety like the sea that cannot rest. In verse 24, he deals with the effects on Damascus itself of God's divine judgment. Damascus is waxed feeble. She turned herself to flee, and trembling has seized on her. Anguish and sorrows have taken hold of her as of a woman in travail. So Damascus has grown feeble and turns to flee. The picture of Damascus here is one of feebleness and in panic, distress, and pain. And verse 25, as a result of God's judgment, is that her glory will now depart. How is a city of praise not forsaken, the city of my joy? Now, Isaiah chapter 7, verses 7-9, describes Damascus as the powerful leader of a confederacy against Judah. Yet this once powerful leader, a city that was praised by many and knew joy, would become Ichabod, without glory. Remember, Ichabod means without glory. Also in verse 26, her military will experience massive death. Therefore, her young men shall fall in her streets. Now, in light of God's judgment, The young men or soldiers have fallen in the street. All the men of war shall be brought to silence in that day, says Jehovah of hosts. And the silence here is the silence of death. The picture is of such divine judgment against the Syrians of Damascus that the city is filled with death and silence. The picture is Damascus, his judgment would be so severe that the city would fall asleep to death. The judgment ends in verse 27 with God's fire of judgment. And I will kindle a fire in the wall of Damascus, and it shall devour the palaces of Ben-Hadad. Now, Ben-Hadad literally means son of the god Hadad. Now, this was the name of the dynasty that ruled in Damascus in the 9th and 8th centuries BC. 9th and 8th centuries BC. We can find the same prophecy in Amos chapter 1, verse 4. So, verses 23 to 27 describe the nation of Aram under divine judgment. And Damascus would now suffer massive devastation, and the temples to its false gods would also be destroyed. Then we come to Kedar and Hazor. And now these are Arab tribes, modern day Saudi Arabia. These are the prophecies, verses 28 to 33 deal with the prophecies against these tribes, Arab tribes, Kedar and Hazor. Now, in the period of the Hebrew scriptures, Arabia was never a unified kingdom as it is today under the Saudis. Rather, the land was always composed of various tribes, and the judgment would come against these two key tribes of Kedar and Hazor. We see the topic in verse 28 of Kedar and of the kingdoms of Hazor, which Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, smote. So Kedar is one of the tribes mentioned in present-day Saudi Arabia. Kedar was a son of Ishmael, who himself was a son of Abraham back in Genesis 25, verse 13. The occasion which brought up the prophecy of Jeremiah concerning these kingdoms was the fact that Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had smitten this area. Nebuchadnezzar's invasion of the Arab tribes occurred in 599 BC. 599 BC, sometime around 599, this prophecy came into view. In second part of verse 28 and verse 29, we see the destruction of Kedar. Thus says Jehovah, arise, ye go up to Kedar and destroy the children of the east. Now, verse 28, we see here the call to destruction. Arise, go up to Kedar, destroy the children of the east. Now, children of the east, the expression children of the east is a common biblical term for the Saudi Arabian tribes. And this term is found several times. We see them there in Genesis 29:1, Judges 6:33 and 7:12, Judges 8:10, 1 Kings 4 verse 30. They're all there on the slide. Job 1 verse 3, Isaiah 11 verse 14, and lastly Ezekiel 25 verse 4. Now, when this call to destroy is finally fulfilled, the results are found in verse 29. Their tents and their flocks shall they take. They shall carry away for themselves their curtains and all their vessels and their camels. Now, in other words, what we see here is the possessions of these Arab tribes will become possessions and spoil for these future invading armies or enemies. The tent curtains of Kedar are also mentioned in the Song of Solomon, chapter 1, verse 5. The tents of the Kedarites were known for their beauty. This is a Song of Solomon. I am black but comely, O ye daughters of Jerusalem, as the tents of Kedar, as the curtains of Solomon. So there's something pretty spectacular about these curtains. They're going to lose all of this, and it's all going to become spoil for others. And they shall cry unto them, terror on every side. So the result of God's judgment would be an all-encompassing terror. Hebrew term here for terror on every side, Magor Masabib. We saw it back in Jeremiah 6, verse 25. and also Jeremiah 20, verse 3, 4, and 10, and Jeremiah 46, verse 5. So that's Magor, Massa, Bib, terror on every side. Now, in verse 29, it refers to the shout of the Babylonian army as it approached the tents of the Kedarites. Now, we see the destruction of Hazor in verses 30 to 33. The passage begins in verse 30 with a call to flee. Flee ye, wander far off, dwell in the depths, O ye inhabitants of Hazor, says Jehovah. For Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, has taken counsel against you and has conceived a purpose against you. So Jehovah urged the people of Hazor to flee, get far away, run away. And the reason for the flight is that King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon has taken a conspiracy or a counsel against them. His purpose is to bring their existence to a final end. In verse 31, Hazor is described as a kingdom in security. Oops. Oh dear. Verse 31. Arise, get you up onto a nation that is at ease, that dwells without care, says Jehovah, that have neither gates nor bars, that dwell alone. The picture here is that the Arabian tribes of Hazor, because they live in the desert and in the wilderness, they're hidden from sight by the sand dunes, they believe that they are secure. They thought that no one would bother to cross the desert to attack them. They did not even have city gates or bars to protect them. However, no physical barrier could stop Nebuchadnezzar because it was Jehovah, the God of Israel, who sent the Babylonian king against Hazor. Verse 32 describes the destruction itself. First, their possessions shall be destroyed, and their camels shall be a booty, and the multitude of their cattle a spoil. So their livestock possessions will become a spoil for Nebuchadnezzar. And second, the people will be scattered. I will scatter unto all winds them that have the corners of their hair cut off. The expression, the corners of their hair cut off, was found twice earlier on in Jeremiah 9, verse 26, Jeremiah 9, 26, and Jeremiah 25, 23. Jeremiah 25, 23. Yeah, this was a practice of the Arab tribes. It was a means they used to identify themselves. It was a practice which was forbidden to the Jews. And I will bring their calamity from every side of them, says Jehovah. So the idea here is of a massive destruction. Their possessions will become spoil, the people will lose their lives. And the result of this judgment are found in verse 33. And Hazor shall be a dwelling place of jackals, a desolation forever. No man shall dwell there, neither shall any son of man sojourn there. So Hazor is going to be a dwelling place of jackals, going to be a desolation forever. And third, no man's going to dwell there. And last of all, no man shall sojourn there. No one shall even travel through therein. Now, this prophecy has not yet been fulfilled. Today, Saudi Arabia, the area of ancient Hazor, is a great economic power because of her supply of oil to the Western world. And therefore, Jeremiah's statements about Hazor's destruction takes on an eschatological dimension. The prophecy must then be fulfilled in the prophetic future. This is going to be a third spot in the millennial kingdom, which will be a perpetual wasteland. Like Edom before it, and as we shall see Babylon after, Saudi Arabia will become a continuous perpetual wasteland during the millennial kingdom. No one will live in Saudi Arabia, neither will anyone actually pass through it. Now we come to Elam, or Persia, or Iran. Elam was a country northeast of the Persian Gulf and southeast of Babylon. Today, the region is part of the nation of Iran. This country received its name from the first son of Shem, right back in Genesis 10, verse 22. Its capital was the city of Susa, also known as Shushan. This should be familiar names to us. Verse 34, chapter 49. The word of Jehovah that came to Jeremiah the prophet concerning Elam, in the beginning of the reign of Zedekiah, king of Judah. So, as we said, Elam is present-day southwest Iran. The capital, Susa, also Shushan. Shushan, we see right back in Nehemiah chapter 1, verse 1, Nehemiah 1:1, and in Esther. Remember Esther chapter 1, verses 2 to 5. Esther chapter 1, verses 2 to 5. The stories of Nehemiah and Esther, to a great degree, take place in the country of Elam. Elam was the first son of Shem, according to Genesis 10:22, very ancient kingdom. Now, the date of this prophecy was in the beginning of the reign of Zedekiah, king of Judah. So this prophecy came in 597 BC. Now, 2 years later, Nebuchadnezzar sacked the Elamites in 595, 594 BC. That's when he plundered them. The destruction of Elam we find in verses 35 to 38. In verse 35, we have the declaration of the coming destruction. Thus says Jehovah of hosts, behold, I will break the bow of Elam, the chief of their might. Now, Elam was famed for its bowmen, bows. Isaiah 22 verse 6 tells us that. The point of those figures is that the military power of Elam will be shattered. They'll not be able to withstand the coming judgment. Then in verse 36, he talks about the dispersion of Elam. And upon Elam will I bring the four winds from the four quarters of heaven, and will scatter them toward all those winds, and there shall be no nation whither the outcasts of Elam shall not come. The picture here is of a worldwide dispersion of the Elamites. There shall be no nation among whom the outcasts of Elam shall not come. In fact, the Elamite or modern-day Iranians will be dispersed. Iranians, remember, Iranians are not Arabs, okay? They're Persians. They share the same religion, Islam, but they're not Arabs. Now, this prophecy has not seen its final fulfillment. Now, considering also that Elam, which represents modern-day Iran, the prophecy shows that a time will come when all Iranians or Persians will go into dispersion. And besides a worldwide dispersion, verses 37 to 38 is going to be also destruction. The destruction is going to come in two ways. First, there will be death. Verse 37, I'll cause Elam to be dismayed before their enemies, before them that seek their life. And I will bring evil upon them, even my fierce anger, says Jehovah, and I will send a sword after them till I have consumed them. So Elam is going to be dismayed before their enemies and before those who seek their lives. And God's going to bring this calamity upon them. The sending out of the sword we see here means that they're going to die by means of war, by means of battle, and many of them will not survive. The destruction is going to come through massive death as a result of this military struggle. The second thing we see here is that there'll be subjugation. Verse 38, and I'll set my throne in Elam and will destroy from thence king and princes, says Jehovah. Now, setting up a throne is a symbol of subjugation. So God will rule there in the sense that he will rule there in judgment. And this is used twice before. We've seen it twice before in Jeremiah. Right back in Jeremiah 1 verse 15, Jeremiah 1 verse 15, and in Jeremiah 43 verses 8 to 13, 43, 8 to 13. God will cause Elam to be subjugated. He will destroy the kings and the princes from Elam. Now, some of this has been seen in recent times. He has described destruction subjugation and a dispersion of these Elamites or Iranians. Today, many persons of Iranian descent are taking up residency all over the world. Here in Australia, quite a large population. Now, however, what we see in verse 39, there's going to be the future restoration of Elam. But it shall come to pass in the latter days that I'll bring back the captivity of Elam, says Jehovah. Now, God intends to bring back the captivity of Elam in the latter days. Again, the latter days refers to the millennial or messianic kingdom. God will bring back the captivity of the Iranians. Once again, Jeremiah uses his favorite word, shuv, to bring back or to return. Now, after the dispersion, there's going to be a regathering of the Iranians. There will be a nation of Elam or Iran in the millennial kingdom. And this was pronounced with the Egyptians in Jeremiah 46, verse 26. It was promised with Moab in Jeremiah 48, verse 47. It was promised with Ammon in Jeremiah 49, verse 6. It's also promised here to Elam in verse 39. So in these passages of judgment concerning various nations, for some of them he promises total destruction so that they will not survive into the millennial kingdom. 3 nations are promised total destruction: Edom, Saudi Arabia, and the city of Babylon. Now, and Babylon and Edom will be burning wastelands. Now, on the other hand, while other nations will suffer judgment and destruction, they will be regathered and established as a separate independent kingdom during the millennial age. And these nations include Egypt, Moab, Ammon, and Elam. And that brings us to the end of this study today. Thank you very much for coming along. Study hard and grow strong.